All right, so today we're going to do the integumentary system, and the integumentary system is our skin. So we'll be looking at the dynamics and composition of skin, as well as the components of the skin and of itself, as well as the nervous system relationship to it. So as with any system, we want to kind of look at some of the basic structures, and eventually, we're going to look at the functions of the system. So our integumentary system includes, well, of course, our skin in its totality, which includes various different types of tissue types that we'll take a look at. Our hair is actually an extension of the skin and grows from the hair follicles themselves. So we'll take a brief look at that, but we don't really pay too much attention to the exact composition of hair. Nails, obviously, they grow from our nail beds. And then our glands. So we'll take a look at some glands here. And actually, that's going to be this little picture right here is the dynamic of what we're going to look for in regards to the structuring of the skin. So the skin happens to be the largest and heaviest organ system in your body. It's roughly about 16% of your body mass, and as we'll see, it composes of many different structures and several different types of tissues. So finally, we get to the physiological functions of the integumentary system. So what exactly is our skin doing for us? Well, it's more than just the wrapper of our body and containing our internal environment, but first and foremost, it offers protection. Now, it offers protection in many forms. Of course, it acts as a physical barrier. So, of course, if we had like a cut or something like that, that exposes our internal environment, leaving us susceptible to infections and so on and so forth. So, of course, our skin acts as a protective barrier, but it also acts as a chemical barrier too, because of the bacteria and the other cells that exist on the surface of the skin and around the skin that will fight off other, various pathogens and, invasive, things that might actually get onto the surface of our skin. So, and that leads to our immunity. So, part of that protection being immunity, the chemical barrier of the skin as well. Absorption. Our skin can actually absorb nutrients and other things through itself. So, if, for instance, you ever use such as a dermal patch, meaning it's on the skin to absorb nutrients or medications as well, definitely on that side. Sensation, and probably the largest function in regards to massage therapy, especially for the skin, but the skin is essentially one gigantic sensory organ. So we're going to look at a lot of different sensory receptors that are involved with the skin that tell us different things about our external and internal environment. So we'll definitely be taking a heavier look at that. And to me personally, if we were to break it down, the hierarchy of what massage is doing or what massage is working for, we think that we work muscles, and yes, in part we do affect muscles, but none of the benefits that massage has happens without the input or the say so of the nervous system. Now, even so, even though it's all nervous system based, our massage manipulations and the affecting of the nervous system is all done through the medium of skin, because, well, as massage therapists, we're physically touching the skin and addressing many different sensory receptors, which then, of course, our pressure will lead to the muscle tissue and cause, various sensory responses and nervous system responses in there. Then temperature regulation. We'll take a brief look at what's called thermoregulation, which is our skin's ability to essentially disperse heat or conserve heat in the body, depending on the needs that we might have. So for instance, if it's cold outside, we conserve heat towards the center of the body. If it's hot outside, we try to radiate as much heat off of the surface of our skin. And then excretion. So our skin obviously can eliminate certain wastes through the form of sweat. So our sweat can contain various minerals and other things. As you might understand, there's salt sometimes in sweat, as well as other minerals and microscopic type of things. So we can excrete stuff, not even just sweat, but also oil, right? Our skin does like to have a nice natural oil to itself to keep itself nice and healthy. So we'll take a look at those glands that do excretory things. And then lastly, our skin can photosynthesize, well, excuse me, not photosynthesize, but synthesize vitamin D. So as sun and UV rays, reach to the surface of the skin, we have specialized cells that will, receive that UV light and then convert it into a useful mineral such as vitamin D. So we do need some sunlight in our life to make sure that we're happy and healthy. So cracking into the various structures of the system, we have what's called the epidermis and a few surrounding factors of, the epidermis being avascular. What does that mean? And what exactly is this tissue layer? So the epidermis happens to be the first layer of tissue, or excuse me, the first layer of the skin. It's the outermost layer of skin, and it is made of epithelial tissue. So it's a very thin layer of tissue. And as we all should know from our previous lecture on the essential overview of anatomy, that epithelial tissue lines the internal structures, lines the hollow cavities of the body, as well as the external structures such as our skin. So this epidermis is is made of epithelial tissue, and epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning that it does not have a direct blood supply, but because of its relationship to connective tissue being so intimately close, that it actually absorbs, and we'll see this in another slide, it'll absorb nutrients from the connective tissue layer beneath it, which has lots of blood vessels. So we'll take a look at that in a second here. Now, the epidermis does contain 5 different layers. Now, typically I try to tell my students to only pay attention to the first and the last per se, but we'll take a brief look at all of them. So the outermost lens, and this whole list is from the outermost layer to the innermost layer. The outermost layer is the stratum corneum, also known as the horny layer, which is just dead keratinized cells that are ready to flake off. Essentially, if we go down to the very bottom layer, or the basal layer or base layer, we have the layer that is creating new keratin cells, which most of our skin is keratinized cells. And these cells just build up, all the way to where they get to the outermost layer, the stratum corneum, and then they flake off and become, well, dust. So the stratum corneum, also known as the horny layer, is the outermost layer where the keratinized cells flake off. Then we have the stratum lucidium, which is only found in thicker areas of the skin, such as like the palms of the hands or soles of the feet. You wouldn't find this on thin layers of skin, like on the eyelids or anything like that. So like lucid. So how I usually remember that is, if you're lucid, right, from like a dream, you're kind of in that semi-quasi state. So sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. The stratum granulosum is known as the grainy layer. The stratum spinosum, known as the spiny layer, kind of sounds like that, right? And then the stratum basal, which is the base layer or growth layer, where all of those keratin cells are created and then push upwards. So we also have some additional cells outside of the keratin cells. We'll definitely take a look at the keratin cells in a second, though. But we do have cells that produce melanin. And what exactly is that melanin doing for us? Well, simply enough, melanocytes, because cyte means cells, melano, right, referring to the melanin that it produces. Melanocytes produce the melanin, and the melanin is obviously what gives us our skin pigment, or allows us to absorb that sunlight and, photosynthesize, or excuse me, I keep saying photosynthesis, we're not plants, synthesize the vitamin D there. The epidermal cells producing keratin would be keratinocytes, and as we said, the outermost layer, the stratum corneum, is where these dead keratinized cells accumulate and flake off. Now, I'll also note that our hair and our nails are also keratin cells. So the hair that grows out of our hair follicles are keratin component or composed of keratin cells. Now, we all know that the skin is always sloughing, right? We get flaky and ashy and all that. So, the skin is constantly replacing and building itself over and over again. And it approximately takes, roughly 3-4 weeks for, one cell to be produced and get all the way up to the outermost layer to flake off and become dust. So roughly, 3 to 4 weeks. Now, the epidermal dermal junction is what we were mentioning earlier about the relationship between the dermis or connective tissue layer and the epidermis. So epidermal dermal junction is where the epidermis meets the dermis, aka the connective tissue layer of skin. And this plays a role by allowing the nutrient exchange to occur because of, as we said, the avascularity of epithelial tissue. Now, it obviously has another name, more layman's term names, which is known as the basement membrane or the basement layer there. So the epidermal dermal junction is the meeting point between the epidermis and dermis where the nutrient exchange occurs. So the dermis happens to be the answer to question 10 here, which is the layer known as the true skin. The dermis is where we're going to find essentially all of the receptors, sensory receptors. We'll see that the hair follicles kind of extend down into here. We'll see that the glands are extended down in here, the blood vessels as well. So this, as we said, the dermis is made of connective tissue, and connective tissue consists of many different properties that we've already gone over in our previous lecture about the tissue types and the general overview of anatomy. So beneath the dermis, though, is what we call the hypodermis, hypo meaning beneath, which goes by several names. So sometimes we call it the subcutaneous layer because cutaneous refers to the skin. So subcutaneous is right below the skin. And now sometimes we just commonly say superficial fascia, but superficial fascia is a separate layer per se. So essentially, if we look up into here, we have the hypodermis here, which is a network of loose connective tissue and adipose tissue embedments, essentially, our fatty layer. And there would actually be a sheet of fascia, which would be the superficial fascia. So now the superficial fascia, just to point out, is very interesting. That is the same continuum of fascia that is literally going to, permeate throughout the rest of the musculature and then start partitioning off all of the different parts of the body. So it's like fascia is it's a very interesting thing. Fascia is the most, in my opinion, coolest type of tissue in the body because it just supports and separates and gives everything shape in the body. So the superficial fascia that lays over the top of the, like muscle layer per se, kind of just like melts down. Think like just like a piece of cheese just melting through a grate, and it just coats everything, and so it becomes the different connective tissue coverings of the muscular cells, and then goes all the way down to the periosteum. Now, granted, these are get restructured, so they are variously different structures, but it's almost the same continuum of that single layer of fascia from the superficial all the way down to the deepest layer. So and in my opinion, when we were talking about what massage therapy truly works for, obviously the nervous system first and foremost, through the medium of the skin, and then fascia, because fascia essentially dictates the positioning and shape of all of the microscopic structures of our internal environment. So especially in regards to muscles, if we're trying to work muscles, we really want to address the fascial network because that's essentially what's going to allow the muscles to do what we want. So the panniculus adiposus is just the technical term for, well, the fatty layer in the hypodermis. And as we age, we obviously lose our collagen. So a lot of that is collagen in our skin. So being that we lose that that collagen, that firming agent of the skin, our skin begins to wrinkle, becomes loose, brittle, so on and so forth as we age. And so we consider this for massage therapy because we do want to be careful with our geriatric clients because of the tensile forces that we can place onto the skin could be irritating. Also, you know, sometimes like if you're going to work under someone's an elderly person's back or neck, right? You get that loose skin and it kind of bunches up. You want to be careful of that. Also consider that because of as we age, we lose these insulating layers. Our fatty tissue, our you know, older people typically feel a little bit colder on average. Not always the case, but it's possible. And so we would want to maybe use a blanket or, you know, pull up the heating pad a little bit more because typically our massage rooms are usually tempered around 72 degrees, which could be pretty chilly.
I'll see you in just a second.
So we have a long question here for question 13. What are concentrated spots of melanin called, and what is it known when an individual cannot produce melanin, and what is it called when someone has partial loss of pigmentation that usually occurs in patches, and what condition of the skin, or what is the condition of the skin in the eyes as they yellow? Some of these we might already know, but as we know, you know, the melanin is the pigmentation cell or component of our skin. And so concentrated spots of melanin would be, well, freckles. Freckles would be the, you know, hyper, you know, concentrated points of melanin that give us the little speckled look there. And then albinism is the term when someone cannot produce melanin and we don't have any pigmentation, and we'll turn, you know, start white. Partial loss of pigmentation would be vitiligo, so that splotchy Michael Jackson disease, I guess is what somebody would call it, right? And then the jaundice is where we have yellowing of the skin in the eyes, and that's usually associated because of you know, accumulated bile and, you know, poor liver function. So that's usually more deeper medical condition. But if you see something like that with your clients, it might be cause for concern to make sure that they go get checked out and that they're healthy. Some terms here in regards to the skin, we have hyperemia, ischemia, and cyanosis. So hyperemia is increased blood flow due to vasodilation. As we've discovered in our cardiovascular lecture, the vasodilation is where the blood vessels widen and allow more blood flow through them. And we've seen hyperemia before as massage therapists where we're working on someone's back and then their back starts to turn red. So we're actually increasing blood flow to the surface of the skin, which could be a good thing. And then ischemia is where we decrease blood flow through vasoconstriction. So in this case, if vasodilation was the widening of the blood vessels, vasoconstriction is where the blood vessels narrow or constrict or tighten up, reducing the amount of blood flow in the area. And then cyanosis, well, cyan is a color of blue, shade of blue. And so cyanosis is the condition of having a bluish hint or tint to the skin. And this is typically due to lack of oxygen. So, you know, typically you might see people who well, hopefully you've never seen this, but drowning victims will usually have bluing hue there. Or for instance, sometimes people who, like Raynaud's disease, sometimes they can pull all of the blood flow out of the area, which then can cause the purple cyan color in the skin sometimes because the oxygen content will be gone because the blood flow isn't going into those areas. Cold in itself too can cause cyanosis as well. But not a common thing, let's see, with massage necessarily. Looking at the hair follicles, there's a couple components to them. One is that we have these muscles on them to help them stand up. We call these the erector pili muscles, or as I like to think, like raise the pylon. Essentially, and that's what your hair is in a sense. So as you can see here, here is the little erector pili muscle, which allows the hair to stick straight on end. And there's a reason for this, and especially when those muscles contract, that's what gives us that goose flesh that we understand with, you know, being, you know, scared, cold, so on and so forth. And there's many reasons for the hair to stand on end. One, our hair is a sensory receptor. So we have what's called the hair root plexus, which can detect air movements or movements of the hair itself. So that if our hair is sticking up on end, it's almost like antennas that are receiving more information. So like if you get that creepy vibe about something that, they say like the hairs on the back of your neck are sticking up. Well, they're sticking up because we don't have eyes on the back of our head. So the hairs on the back of our neck stick up so that we can sense movement or something going on around us, as well as the contractile component of the erector pili muscle and that goose flesh can help us warm up, because when muscles contract, they produce heat. And then when the hair stands on end, that actually makes it possible to trap air around the surface of the skin, which then insulates us even further. So that's why another reason for getting the goose flesh and hairs sticking up when we're cold. So pretty cool stuff. The compact keratinized cells forming hard plates on the distal surface of our digits are, well, those nails. We don't need to learn about the different structuring of the nails, so that's as far as we need to know, that nails are made out of keratin. Now we're looking into the glands, the sebaceous glands to be specific. Sebaceous, I love that word. It sounds almost like a luxurious word. Sebaceous, almost seductive. And, well, sebaceous glands are our oil glands. So think like you're just sensually rubbing oils on your body to moisturize and nourish your skin. But sebaceous glands are located in the hair follicles, and they secrete what's called the sebum, which is an oily substance onto the hair and surface of the skin, so that, well, the hair stays, fresh and healthy, and as well as that oil will get onto the surface of the skin, because we don't like dry, irritated skin. We like to have nice, moist skin. Moist, sorry for the word, you probably might got triggered. Sudoriferous glands, the other type of gland that we will associate and learn in the integumentary system. There are two types of sudoriferous glands, and they are located in various different spots. So sudoriferous glands, almost sudoriferous, right? It smells kind of funky. Well, sudoriferous glands are our sweat glands, and there are two types. We have eccrine glands and apocrine glands. Now, eccrine glands are the generic sweat glands that are found almost through all the body, except for essentially your lips. Your lips don't sweat. But these sweat glands are found all over, and they produce this sweat for many reasons that'll be associated to the thermoregulation we're going to take a look at. But the apocrine glands are specialized sudoriferous glands that secrete a particular sweat that is associated with our pheromones. And so they're located in the stinky places. So like the chest, the axilla, the groins, anogenital region, all of those, the stinky places of our body. And so, like we said, that contains our pheromones. So cracking into thermoregulation and looking at the role that skin plays with regulating the temperature of our body. So it goes through, it's all essential to the process of vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So when our body detects that it is cold outside, we want to maintain a pretty consistent core temperature. And when our skin and various thermoreceptors detect that it's cold outside, what we're going to do is we're going to constrict blood vessels to the surface of the skin, because we don't want blood to circulate to the surface of the skin, because then that brings and circulates the cool air and cooled blood back through our system, thus cooling our bodies even further. So we essentially reserve the heat to the core of our bodies, and this is why we get frostbite in our toes and fingers, and the further away parts of ourselves, sometimes like the nose and stuff like that, because, well, if we're freezing to death in a survival situation, our body knows we can make it without some fingers or toes, but we can't have organs failing and shutting down. So we're going to conserve the heat to the center mass of the body. And then vice versa, if we are hot, then we open up those blood vessels and send as much blood to the surface of the skin, essentially acting like an air condition, where we're sending this blood to pass over the cool surface of the skin, because the surface of your skin is always a lot cooler than your core temperature. It's roughly about a 6 to 8 degree difference, I think. And so we take that blood to the surface of the skin to then cool. And so there's other additional factors to bringing blood and heat to the surface of the skin for thermal regulation, such as the sweat that we just looked at. So sweating helps to cool us as well through a process called evaporation. So as the sweat evaporates off of our skin, it pulls heat with it, so helping us to cool down even more. And I'm sure you've seen people who might be, outside playing a sport or running, and they're flush, right? Their cheeks are flushed, their skin might be a little bit flush, right? That is the hyperemia to the surface of the skin in an attempt to cool the body. Now we're looking at the various skin receptors and the roles that they play. And a lot of these can be very helpful in understanding the dynamics and how massage is beneficial. So we have a big list here. So let's go ahead and make our way through briefly how these can help. So first up is the Merkel discs. And these are our tactile sensory receptors of the skin, and they detect light touch and typically involved with very finite social interactions and environmental receptivity. So they are what's really going to be dealt with when we're initiating our touch onto our clients. And then the Meissner corpuscles are the more numerous, and they detect the light sensations on the surface of the skin. And so these can actually be a little bit more activated when we are working over the entire body. So for instance, Meissner corpuscles, they react and they kind of spaz out, but then they eventually get kind of turned off. And an example could be like when you put a shirt on for the day, right? And the shirt kind of feels weird and funky, like your skin's like, what is this? This is weird. Those are the Meissner corpuscles acting up, but then eventually we just kind of shut them off and don't really worry about them. Nociceptors, as we learned in the nervous system, are the receptors that detect pain, or what's called nociception. The hair root plexus detects the movements of the hair. And then we have Krauss corpuscles, which, useful when we're using cryotherapy, as they detect cold sensations and various textures. And then the last two, in my opinion, is what I try to use as a justification for why our heavy pressure and stretching is very beneficial. So the Ruffini corpuscles are typically found, deep in the body, especially around the joints and stuff, as well as the Pacini corpuscles. And as we see, the Ruffini corpuscles respond to heavy pressure. They respond to sustained touch and skin stretching, right? And so, as we see here, they have been linked to potentially, inhibiting the sympathetic activity of the nervous system. So this Ruffini corpuscle is one justification of why, moderate pressure within someone's comfort level with a sustained pressure and a nice drag on that glide, on that stroke, on that massage stroke, can be very relaxing, because that tensile force being placed on the connective tissue structures as we have that drag in our glide, plus the pressure associated with it, is very soothing and relaxing, right? That's why a lot of people really like to have firm pressure with their massage. Firm pressure in the nature of the pressure that is the right pressure for that client. And then the Pacini corpuscles, they roughly the same as the Ruffini, but they are the ones detecting and monitoring stretching, which kind of elicit the same response as the Ruffini corpuscles, in that they cause an inhibition of the sympathetic system. So that's why stretching just really feels good and just creates like these endorphins for us, and we're just like, oh wow, after like a good like yoga class or just a good stretch session, we typically feel nice and relaxed. So typically for me, it's the last two, the Ruffini corpuscles and the Pacini corpuscles, that I think merit a little bit more research and understanding in how to affect them to really get a good benefit out of triggering the nervous system through the means of the skin. And then we'd be into our pathologies. So that brings us to the end of our video, and that would be the integumentary system. A very short system, not too much to it, just basically the central structuring of the system, as we have the outermost layer, the epidermis, being the first layer with its various 5 layers that my personal opinion is to only learn the first and the last, so the stratum corneum versus the stratum basal or germinativum, and then learning the dermis being the true skin, and that the true skin contains the hair follicles, the the glands, all the blood vessels, and then distinguishing the glands may come into a pertinent, handy thing, but otherwise, just a very roughly easy lecture. And then the pathologies, we already have the pathologies on another video, so be sure to check those out if you need the pathologies. So I will end that recording, and you guys have a great day.